Welcome, everybody, to the Vision for You Big Book Study Group operating out of Ireland. My name is Noel, and I am an alcoholic. And tonight we are on Speaker Week. Last week we were on Group Study Week, and we covered the doctor's opinion. Tonight we will hear from Myers R. from Ingram, Texas, who's a good friend of mine, and I've known him a long time. But before I hand you over to Myers, who's going to share for around 45 to 50 minutes, again, Myers, we're not that strict. You keep time yourself. You don't have to use the 50 minutes. However, if you do, there's no panic. So just before I hand you over to Myers, I'm going to read a earlier version of the preamble. So forward to the first edition states, we are not an organization in a conventional sense of the word. There are no dues or fees whatsoever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who are getting results from this book, particularly those who have commenced work with other alcoholics. So, with that, I'm now going to hand you over. So, Myers, if you could unmute yourself and the screen, you're clean on the screen. The screen is yours for the next 45 to 50 minutes.
Thanks. No, the first time I met Noel, he was carrying a little bitty lunchbox, and he had, it's like he was in elementary school when I first met him, and now all these years later, he's a big boy and sober, which just flat freaks me out. Pretty amazing. Um, Noel was a big doer in the young people meetings and stuff in Ireland, and it was always a treat. I'd see his name on various things, and then once Zoom started, I picked up on him again real quick. And um, I used to spend a ton of time in Europe, and I was in Europe 5 times in one year, just doing AA stuff, and it was a busy thing. And it's amazing, really, how much it's changed over the years. I remember doing a big book workshop thing in London one time, and we couldn't find a single. Now this is like close to 20 years ago. We couldn't find a single book study in the metropolitan area of London. You all know how big that is, and we couldn't find one. And within a year after we started the workshop stuff, we found 10 meetings that had started that were teaching the big book. And so let me give you a little disclaimer. I better introduce myself first. My name is Myers Raymer. I'm a very grateful recovered alcoholic from Ingram, Texas, which is right in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's like in central Texas, in the sticks. And I'm talking about something like this, about the doctor's opinion. We could do it like a book study, and we could go line by line through 7.5 pages. But in the end, you'll know a lot about Silky, about Dr. Silkworth, but you won't understand the importance of why his stuff was so profound. And so I have a tendency, anytime I get a chance to talk, I have a tendency to want to spend some time talking about the motivational piece of this. Why is this chapter important? Because without it, I don't know if this is just me being an old crusty Texan, but I'm kind of a, there's got to be a reason to do things. If there is a reason, then I'm all in, and I'll move towards it like that. But I spent, and I think it's important for you to understand this. I spent the first 7 years of my recovery deal, which was all about sobriety. I got sober in January of '88, and everything I did was about going to a meeting. I was going to 6 meetings a week. I had a big book that said a coffee cup on. I never read it. I had a sponsor in name only. I never worked the steps. And it was curious that I would be in a situation where all of a sudden I would find myself um, um, restless, irritable, and discontent. The book's going to talk about it. And I didn't even recognize that's what it was. So let me ask you, how many of y'all have ever been in a situation where you thought, if I could just get rid of whatever the addiction was, booze, dope, whatever, if I could get rid of the addiction, I'm going to be fine. everything is going to be okay. Because that Canadian whiskey and crazy methamphetamines is my problem. And all I'm going to have to do is get rid of that, and I'll be the stellar guy that I think that I am. Well, you can imagine how bizarre that was to get rid of the addiction and then to find out that realistically, I'm the stage character that Bill Wilson talks about in the big book over and over and over again. I'm not happy, and let me tell you, my family isn't either. I've got three daughters and a wife that I adore, and nobody's happy because I am a stage character. I'll say whatever I got to say to get you to do what I want you to do because selfishness is part of the deal. Now, why is any of this important in what we're talking about? Because I ended up in a relationship with an old crusty guy that was older than me by a lot. Um, a guy by the name of Cliff Bishop. He's passed away years ago in Dallas, and Clifford was had started a book study in Dallas, a 55-minute drive from where I lived up there. And I'm a suicidal mess, and I'm Londa's already living in another side of the house because I make things so uncomfortable. And somebody suggested I go meet this guy. Chris, my twin brother, actually introduced me to him. He and Mark Houston introduced me to Clifford. Clifford was the first guy that ever asked me questions that made me uncomfortable. He never asked me how my day was going. He never asked me what I was going to share in the meeting. He asked me things like, Myers, do you understand anything about the program? And I went, yep, meeting makers make it. That's all I need to know. And you can imagine, I'm going to 6 meetings a week. How many meetings do I got to go to? Y'all understand where this is going like that. It was like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I felt like I had walked into some place that I'd never been before, and we're talking about things that I'd never talked about before. But I'm starting to learn things that started to make sense. And as a result of that, I became hypersensitive about the things that were big book based and things we needed to know and things that we didn't need to know. I think there's a place in our program to talk about personal things and this sort of thing, but when your pet squirrel dies, we don't need to take up a whole meeting talking about your dead squirrel. Y'all understand what I'm saying? This is what I definitely understand why it's important. But for crying out loud, I'm looking around the room and there's 3 or 4 people that have been sober 2 days. Do you think they care about what we're talking about for an entire meeting? This is the reason I'm maybe I'm old and grouchy. I don't know. I've watched thousands of miracles in AA that happened when people woke up and realized that if I understand what's in the basic text, I'm going to be okay. And if I don't, I'm going to struggle. I'll tell you a real quick story, and then I'm going to get into the doctor's opinion for sure. Um, there was a winter Texan that used to come down to Texas all the time, and I was doing some part-time work for a treatment place down on the right on the border of Mexico on Padre Island, and I would go down there for 10 days and teach, and then go back to Dallas. And then on the weeks when I wasn't there, the 10 days I wasn't there, Chris, my twin brother, was down there doing the same thing. And we're at a meeting. We had all of our clients there, all these patients that are there at the place. All the guys were with me, and we were at this meeting one night. And this guy who's from up north someplace, he always shared the same thing, and it was always goofy stuff. And so at the end of the meeting, he's always the last guy to share. And he said, I want people to be real clear in this meeting. There's nothing in this book that's that important. The only thing that's important to you is how many meetings you're going to. You'll eventually hear what you need to hear. Now, listen, I've heard that too, but I'm sitting in a room with 32 men that are patients at a treatment place that I'm trying to help get on track of with the big book stuff. And anyway, y'all get where this is going. At the end of the meeting, he goes, oh, and before I quit, I just wanted to tell some of the big book thumpers in here that there's nothing in this book about how we live our life. This is all about how we stay sober one day at a time. And I remember the next day in class, these guys said, Myers, we could see smoke coming out of your ears when that guy said that stuff. And I said, I know. It was all I could do not to go punch him in the nuts. I just like, why would you say something so crazy? But it would take me some years to connect up and realize that we teach what we're taught. And it's one of those deals, if that's all you've been taught, that everything is based on a meeting that you go to, you're going to find yourself disappointed and very much frustrated that recovery, this idea of being sober like that, is a burden that you're going to wonder if you can ever carry for too many years. This is the reason why so many people come to AA and then leave AA, is because they're not hearing the things that they need to hear. And a perfect example of what they need to hear is exactly what we're getting ready to talk about. It's the perfect example of that stuff. And for some of us who are just going to a bunch of meetings and this kind of stuff, and that's working okay, rock on. I guarantee you, people will talk after this talk and they'll say, "Hey, I think this guy's just putting meetings down. He just doesn't like meetings." Listen, homegirl, homeboy, I can't tell you how much I love meetings. I can't begin to tell you how many lives, how many miracles I've seen happen in these meetings like that. It's an amazing deal. But Bill Wilson in the first 100, including the doctor's opinion, Dr. Silkworth, never intended for us to settle a meeting at the center of the program. Which brings the next question. The logical question is, if the meeting is not the center of AA, what is? Well, you need to read the text, because once you read the text, you can't unsee it. The center of our program is a relationship with our Creator. And the relationship with our Creator is possible only because we're willing to get all the crud out of the way that stood between me and our Creator. And that's the center of the program. And the biggest thing that we're supposed to be doing is work and self-sacrifice for others. Look at how many times in the big book they repeat it. Why would they repeat it so often if it wasn't important? In the book alone, the big book alone, in the first 164 pages, the word approached is used 24 different times. 24 times they talk about approaching people. Remember now, in those days, there were maybe one meeting a week in Akron or Cleveland or New York eventually, and then it would later spread out like that. But the meeting wasn't center of things. But we were supposed to go to approach them. And if you've never done that, if you've never spent time carrying a message someplace, there's nothing you will ever do that is more profound for other people and for you than to carry a message of recovery to somebody who may not ever make it to a meeting. A wind-up joint, a treatment center, a halfway house, a jail, places that you can go. I'm hugely drawn towards that because it was the biggest life-changing thing that I ever did. It made such a difference in the stuff that we were doing. So let's talk about Silkworth first. The William Silkworth died in 1951, and he had about 15 years where he worked for Towns Hospital. And he and Charlie, they've got him Charlie Towns that owned that facility, and he and Charlie butted heads a lot around what alcoholism was, what it looked like. It was a pretty tough deal at times. And but Silkworth held his deal, which is always just magic to me like that. As we begin to read this, and then later when we get into Bill's story and read the stuff that happened there, and then later on, there's a couple of other stories in there that we're going to read that the relationship between Roland Hazard and Carl Jung, and whatever. The Stop and think about this just for a second. If Carl Jung, who was working with Roland Hazard, had been like Sigmund Freud with no God anywhere in the picture, you can imagine what he would have told him. It was because Roland Hazard, that Carl Jung was willing to say, dude, I don't know. Shit, I don't know what's going on with you. You are like a walking dumpster fire. I don't know how we're going to figure out what's going on with you like that. And he didn't play any games. Well, Dr. Silkworth did exactly the same thing with Bill Wilson. He's sitting there scratching his head, going, "Golly, this is killing me watching you do this stuff and watching you 4 different times." Bill Wilson was in Towns Hospital 4 different times. Silkworth is trying to help him get through this stuff. Now, remember, in those days, asylums were the final answer. And if you I'll take one zigzag here. I have a tendency to do that. Let me tell you, I just want to move off this thing for 2 seconds. Next time you get a second and you're just goofing around on Amazon or someplace and looking at books and stuff that you might want to buy, William White, Slaying the Dragon. I think Joe may have talked about this last week when he was there like that. There's a guy named William White, and this book, Slaying the Dragon, is a epilogue of what the treatment center was like in the beginning and what happened and blah blah blah. There's a lot of it that's fascinating, but let me tell you what you can't unsee once you see it. There's a whole bunch of pictures in there of what these asylums look like. Have y'all ever noticed in the big book how often they refer to asylums? He was let out of an asylum. He did this. He was in an asylum like that. These asylums weren't hospitals. They were places where they stack your punk ass up and let you die. The pictures of these asylums were horrific. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these. There were hundreds of them scattered across the country, and there were thousands and thousands of men and women. People didn't know what to do with you. If you were a drunk like Noel, they would sit there, they'd look at Noel and go, "Noel, we love you, dude, but we don't know what to do with it." So you're either going to break the law and end up in jail, or if you don't break the law, you're going to end up in an asylum for the rest of your life where you will be insane. And that's basically what it was. But these pictures of these emaciated people leaning against walls, just I can't imagine how uncomfortable it was. Now, I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand like that. Sometimes today we're spoiled rotten because we have so many options about our addiction stuff. And the thing is we have a solution that works 100% of the time if you simply do what they ask you to do within the program. It's funny. I've got a good friend of mine, David Russell, in North Carolina, who's a graphic designer and one of the most brilliant artists I've ever met like that. And he sent me a poster one time, and this little poster said, the definition of a newcomer, desperate but picky. And I'm thinking, he kind of nails it right there like that, because how many times have we met people in these rooms that will come in and they're desperate, they want to be out of trouble at all costs like that, but they want to tell you what they want to do. I don't really want to do that steppy stuff. I just want to hang with my new buddies, and it's going to be okay. Y'all understand? Well, it gets goofy, and so this is the reason why that I was moved so profoundly once I started reading the big book, and once I got into the doctor's opinion like that. Here's a guy who's a classic psychiatrist, and he's trying to line up what everybody's doing as an addicted person in booze or dope land. He's trying to line up with his own understanding of that, and he can't do it. It's not working. His success rates with drunks and the thing in the articles that I've read years ago like that was something like 2% of the people that came through Towns Hospital got sober. 2%. And then he meets Bill Wilson, and Bill Wilson has this profound experience in Towns Hospital, and he's changed completely. And the things that he shared with Silkworth, things started connecting up. And all of a sudden, Silkworth started opening up and going, wait a minute, wait, maybe this is different. And it was a learning experience like you wouldn't believe. I'm in my U.S. version of the big book, so I don't know if our pages are going to line up, but I'm on the first page of the doctor's opinion, 2/3 of the way down the page. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning possible means of recovery. Now, that word recovery or recovered is used, how many did that? 4 different times in this chapter. 4 different times. And the word must is used 4 times. which is fascinating like that. I thought there were no musts in the big book. How many of y'all have ever heard that? People, there are no musts in this book. Oh, go go away. There is. There's a lot of musts. You've got to do this stuff like that. And so it's important. And so as part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must, there's that word, do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. They weren't ever, notice they weren't ever talking about just being, these men got sober one day at a time. They didn't, that didn't even start until after Bill Wilson died in 1971. It's ironic that Bill Wilson and Dr. Silkworth died in the same year. And then shortly after that, the Grapevine magazine started adding stuff. And this one day at a time thing was written by a non-alcoholic. We're going to share our experience, strength, and hope. We're going to blah, 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 blah. And it was just, golly, it drives me insane. That's the reason why this stuff, the fact that Silkworth was able to open up to the idea that what he had witnessed, like eyeball to eyeball, he was standing in the same room with Bill Wilson, who's been there time and time again and can't get sober. And all of a sudden, Bill Wilson has this experience and he goes, wow, maybe maybe I need to get in there and see what's going on. Maybe I need to look differently at some of this stuff. And so it was kind of funny that in the forward to the second edition, he didn't sign his name in the first edition. He didn't sign his name at the end of his deal, but he did later when he came back and he realized because there was such a prolific intake of people that were getting well, and so he kind of changed, and it was a pretty sweet deal. So in the text, Bill Wilson talks for a few minutes, and then Bill Wilson is getting ready to hand it back over to Silkworth again. And Bill Wilson introduces this idea that there was a physical factor, that if we left out the physical component of this thing, that we were making a big old mistake. There were thousands and thousands of physicians that thought that everything about our addiction was physically only. If we could just, which would have been cool if it was, because if that was the case, all we'd have to do is just lock you up for a while until you were completely detoxed and then let you go and you would be okay. They were a lot of the trials, the original trials that they don't talk about it in the doctor's opinion here, but that doctor and some others they did some trials hoping that they could discover, because what they wanted to do, they wanted to all bring it back to trauma and drama and heartache and that kind of stuff. So if you had a trauma growing up, you would be an alcoholic, and if you didn't, you wouldn't. If you were rich, then you would be okay. You wouldn't be an alcoholic like that. And so they were that way. They could think they could just address that. They said, okay, what we got to do is we got to make sure that all the poor people have money, and then there won't be any addiction. They're literally thinking that this is the path they need to go down. And Silkworth is going, I don't think so. They started doing a bunch of trials. I'm an identical twin. They started doing a bunch of trials of twins that had been separated at birth, and they would take one twin would go to one family and one to another, and one would be a rich family and the other would be a not so rich family. One would whatever. They were just trying to line it all up, and what they found out after looking at the data was that it didn't matter, that it was a genetic predisposition. Bunch of Irish folks in here. Look close at your family trees. Look back and see how many folks are like that. Native Americans, holy crap. I mean, when you look at the data of how many Native Americans are struggling with this, they pulled it back finally and realized that it was a genetic predisposition, that we had no control over it. I'm not saying that trauma and drama doesn't make things worse. I'm not making light of any of that, y'all. But that's not the causal part of it. And that's what Silkworth was trying to get us to understand, that was the case. Look at 90% of everything that Silkworth writes in his 7.5 pages. 90% of everything he talks about is the physical component of alcoholism. the physical piece of this thing like that. Why is it that once I take a drink, I can't seem to stop? Then later, when we get into there's a solution more about alcoholism coming up, they're going to talk about the mental component of this, which is the most baffling feature of all of it. Why is it stone cold sober? Do I find myself loaded again? Come on, I can't be that weak willed, can I? Is it I want to take it back to that thing. And that's crazy. These two pieces of this thing, this physical component and this mental component, are a bear. But once you understand it, it makes your own recovery path really, really clear. Um, um, Somewhere 40 years ago, we stopped qualifying people that came to meetings. As a general rule, people don't talk about it anymore. If you're in a meeting, it's because you want to be in a meeting. You're welcome in the meeting. Rock on. The kind of problem with that is that there were a lot of guys like me that got there that had a bunch of toys stacked up. I had a pretty wife, a bunch of nice kids, a building with my name on the side of it like that. I had a lot of toys, airplanes, all kinds of stuff like that. And I'm thinking, how could I possibly be an alcoholic? And I'm always fighting back on that stuff. And so that's what they were trying to understand. This idea that we've stopped qualifying people. I remember I was 7 years sober when somebody finally qualified me. That Cliff Bishop guy that we were talking about finally qualified me. And I remember, guys, I remember driving home after that meeting that night, and I walked in and I went, "Hey, Londa," that's my wife. I said, "Hey, Londa, I'm an alcoholic." And she never cusses. And she looked at me and she said, "No shit, Myers." And I went, "No, no, really, I'm an alcoholic." And she goes, "Are you just now figuring that out?" And I said, "Yeah, sort of. I sort of am." But it was the most freeing thing in the whole wide world because now I realize, hey, there's no wiggle room. I've got a progressive disease that's going to kill me or get me locked up for sure. And this is what I got to do. And it was a game changer. This is the reason why I wonder why, as a fellowship, we stop spending a few minutes with people. I can read you one paragraph in We Agnostics, the first paragraph in We Agnostics. I can read you that one paragraph and qualify you just like that. Just no telling how many people we could have saved if we just be a little more helpful to try to help them see and understand their step one truths. But anyway, y'all get that kind of stuff. There was a single book in the big book that I would take if I was sinking on a ship and I wanted one page out of that book and I was just going to rip it out of there like that. It would be XXV I, in the doctor's opinion, like that. Towards the top of the page, and I'm going to read a piece of this. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on the chronic alcoholic is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol of any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found that they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Now I'm going to hold my finger right there. This is the most profound stuff that Dr. Silkworth wrote, and it was 100% in the face of 95% of all of the psychiatrists in the United States. They didn't believe that. They believed that if they could just teach you to think differently, you'd be able to. It always goes back to that goofy think through the drink thing. Dude, if I could, I would. I mean, y'all get that, right? It's just go down to the next paragraph. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they're to recreate their lives. What they're saying, there's no job is going to save you. No girlfriend is going to save you. In Texas, no big fancy truck is going to save you. And I used to think all of that stuff. I just need to get a bigger pickup and I'm going to be okay. I just need to get this. I just need to, y'all. But the profound thing in there, it must be grounded in a power greater than yourself if they're going to recreate their lives. They didn't. We're right at the very beginning of this book, and they've already started talking about this reliance on a creator, of which we don't exactly understand. We don't exactly know what's going on, and we know it takes courage to do this. But you see how quickly they never in here say But if you just go to enough meetings, you'll be okay. Again, I'm not ragging on the meeting like that, but I want you to understand, if you have an opportunity to carry a message to somebody that's struggling on the side of the road or go to a meeting, 100% of the time, I'm going to say, send a text to your homeboys at the meeting and say, I'll see you next week or tomorrow night. I got somebody to work with, and go help them. Helping others is the foundation of everything that we do, and it will truly change everything. And this is what Silkworth, who is not an alcoholic, is trying to help us to understand. Maybe the most profound stuff in the big book is this last paragraph on that page. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. No kidding. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented, and unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks, drinks which they see others taking with immunity, after they've succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops again, that's the physical part that Silkworth's talking about, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. I'm going to hold my finger there for just a second. Is there anybody in here that hasn't been there in that exact situation? I got this. I'm golden. I'm not going to do it again. When I told my wife a dozen times, I'm not going to do this again, I meant it. I mean, there's always somebody going, well, if a drunk's mouth's moving, he's lying. Go away. That's not true. Maybe there are some liars in it like this, but I'm telling you, I've watched hundreds and hundreds of people that meant everything in their being that they were going to stop, that they were never, ever going to go down that road again. And then they do. They do. Because they don't understand the mental component that they're getting ready to talk about. We're going to do Bill's story, and then we have 2 full chapters that talk 90% of those 2 chapters is about the mental component. Why is it I can't stay stop when I quit? But look at the next line on the thing. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience 90 meetings in 90 days, there's very little hope of his recovery. Oh, I'm sorry. It didn't say that. It didn't say anything about the meeting. What did it say? And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. So obviously the next question, a psychic change is mentioned 3 times on that page like that. Well, this is the hardest thing to get people to understand. And this is probably the biggest single place where our program divided. And we ended up with the meeting makers, guys who believe that everything centers around that. And then we have the other people who believe that a spiritual experience is exactly what they said it was. That would be able to. Let me ask you a question. How many of y'all have ever been in a situation where you got sober and stayed sober for a good bit of time and then started drifting sideways, and pretty soon you're restless, irritable, and discontent again, but you know you can't go back that direction. You know you can't you do this other stuff like this. And so you just let life come out sideways. Things get goofy. You lose relationships. You lose jobs. You lose I mean, some of the worst trauma I've ever seen in individuals is 10 years sober. I mean, I'm a suicidal mess at 7 years sober. No booze, no dope, and I can't live in the same end of the house with my wife because I'm a crazy. I mean, I'm nuttier than a squirrel turd, and she knows it. My daughters know it. Everybody knows it. I'm just trying to get away from them. You see, and I've watched this so many times, and this is the stuff that they're trying to talk about like that. But the miracle that a psychiatrist would have the willingness to compromise his big head and his my intellect is going to solve this deal. Finally, Silkworth did exactly what Carl Jung did. He just sat back in his chair and went, "Shit, I don't know what to do with you. It's like the stuff that we're on, the path that we're on, doesn't seem to be working, and the only thing that seems to work, anecdotally, from watching other people, is moving towards this spiritual experience." And that's That's why this stuff is so important, y'all. It's completely. Um, um, I want to make sure that y'all understand that there's one of my heroes in AA is a guy named Don Pritz that sobered up in the federal penitentiary system in Denver, Colorado in the 60s, early 60s. And in a talk that he did after he got out of the penitentiary, in one of these talks, he said, I'm concerned. Now, this is Don Pritz talking. He goes, I'm concerned that these days we talk more and more about sobriety and less about recovery. I want to kind of wrap this up and talk about this just for just a second like this. I just sober is an okay thing. There's nothing wrong with being sober. The trick is that if you're not careful, you can be really, really messed up sober. And so if you find yourself restless, irritable, and discontent, and you haven't had anything to drink or anything else to use like that, then you need to ask yourself the question, what's the only other alternative that we have? The only other alternative that works is a relationship with our Creator. And you will either gladly move that direction or you won't. Some of us went kicking and screaming towards it. I don't want to do that. I want to just go to enough meetings that I feel okay. Guys, I just, maybe you will for a little while, but I guarantee you, if I looked at the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men I've sponsored over the years, if I looked at the cross sampling of those, the vast majority of men that I've sponsored over the years are older guys who've been sober for 20 plus years, and they're as nutty as they can be. They're just struggling because they have not followed what's going on. Look, the big book is covered up with examples of this stuff. Back in the A Vision for You, there's a bunch of stories back there that talk about how people's lives were changing. Look at two things. Look at how quickly they worked the steps, because it's amazing. The second day, they gave him a big book. The third day, he gave his life to God. I mean, it's that quick type thing. And the other one is that they quit playing games with the sobriety stuff and they looked at a bigger deal. Can I be free? Can I be authentic? Can I be, am I going to be the stage character for the rest of my life? You got to ask that question, guys. Sometimes it takes standing in front of a mirror late at night, just looking in the mirror, going, "Am I authentic, or am I still the stage character that Bill Wilson was trying to talk to us about early in the book? Do I recognize that I'm selfish and self-centered? Do I recognize that I'm still the turd in my own punch bowl? That I'm creating my own problems like that?" And so we got to look at it. We got to pay attention to it and see kind of what's going on. Um, Silkworth will go on. They're going to give you some examples over toward the end of it. Fitz Mayo and Hank Parkhurst stories of how these guys' lives were completely altered, completely changed because of what they did. The Without Silkworth, I'm almost done, y'all. I promise you. Without Silkworth's ability and his humility to talk openly about his own inadequacies, the only his own he didn't understand things, but he was also willing to push an envelope and to say, "Hey, based on what we're seeing, this is what works. This seems to work fine like that." And then you watch the success rates that Bill Wilson talks about within a couple of years. They've codified the steps. Bill Wilson starts working on the traditions. We got all of this work that's going on. We have a whole host of people. God's hand is in the middle of thousands of relationships. And all of a sudden, people are starting to realize, wait a minute, 6 months ago, I was 2 clicks from being dead. And now I'm out there kicking butt, taking names, helping folks, and living life that's transformed. And I didn't think my way into that. It wasn't something my willpower did. My willpower didn't have anything to do with it. My willingness to move towards something different did. And this is the reason why I'm so amazingly attached to big book studies and places where we can read the text and then understand the message that we're supposed to be clear. It also puts us in a position where when Noel calls me and says, "Hey, I'm in trouble, I need some help," then I know exactly where I'm going and exactly what the problem is. In the U.S. edition of it, page 17 in our big book, they talk about a common peril and then they talk about the common solution. Our common peril is important. I'm never making light of our stories like that. When somebody calls me, we need to be able to relate. They need to know that I understand where they're coming from. Yes, I did that too. Yes, I get that like that. But at some point in time, we got to stop with the story stuff. I love some of your stories, but if I have to listen to them 3 times a week for 7 years, I'm not going to want to listen to them anymore. At some point in time, we got to get into the common solution. And the common solution is being able to describe what alcoholism is, what Silkworth kicked the door open for and helped us see the first component of that stuff. So by the time we understand the physical allergy that he's talking about, and we begin to understand the mental component of, and there's a solution and more about alcoholism, and then later on page 64, they introduce us to the spiritual component of this thing. Why is it I'm restless, irritable, and discontent? Y'all ever wonder, real quick before I quit, y'all ever wonder why the people say it's a 2-part program, a 3-part program, or this kind of stuff? Listen, every one of God's kids, everybody struggles with the spiritual malady. Everybody does. Here's the dilemma. When the spiritual malady, restless, irritable, and discontent, kicks me in the butt, the very first thing I think of is, Mars, you could drink just one beer. You could just get one beer on the way home from work, and you see what I'm saying? Normal people don't do that. My wife would never think about doing that like that. I mean, she can get cray cray, she can get nutty, but when she does like that, she'll talk to a friend, she'll do whatever she's got to do, she'll talk to a pastor, she'll talk to a. They got great doctors out there. Talk to them like that. All of God's kids struggle with restless, irritable, and discontent. The problem is because of the mental component, we're put in a point of true jeopardy. And all of a sudden, we are nervous around everything that looks like booze or going back to a dope house or whatever. Listen, true freedom, true recovery means I can go where I want to go and do what I want to do and be in some crazy ass place. I spent 13 hours in Amsterdam one time coming back from a trip from Europe like that on a layover, and Chris and I were walking through there laughing like I don't think I've ever laughed so hard in my whole life. I thought I was going to throw up on the street. We were laughing so hard like that, and I never one time. Some of you youngsters in here, if you don't know anything about Amsterdam, go find Noel's computer and look it up on Noel's computer, okay? And just Google Amsterdam red light district, and then it's right off the airport there. Y'all see what I'm saying? I've pulled dozens and dozens and dozens of drunks out of dope houses. I've done all kinds. I've been crazy places with drunks. I've been on all kinds of crazy stuff like that, and not one time have I ever thought that a drink would help me in any form or fashion. Um, the picture that Bill Wilson, the first 100, painted is one that is absolutely magnificent. And it talks about a life that's so different, that's so unique, and so many of us will miss it because we just want to play the AA light routine and go to a few deals and maybe we'll be okay. My advice is, a crusty old bastard from Texas, my advice is if you're feeling goofy, if you're feeling separate and distanced from everything, start over. The book says we were reborn. The book says that each day we can look at this thing differently and start over. Just sit still, be quiet with God for a little while, and just start a different path and realize that everything is about time with you, time with God, and time with God's kids. Those two things are the only thing that really matter. We can make it really complicated and take it away from that, but in the end, it's about that. Who can we feed? Not when am I going to be fed? We got to think about who we can feed. Anyhow, this crusty old guy is going to say adios and thank you, Noel, for a chance to come and visit.